The biggest problem facing real estate investors in 2024 is not being able to find any properties that can cash flow. The main reason this has happened is because interest rates have skyrocketed the past few years along with home prices. Neither are showing any signs of dropping in the near future. So in this video, I'm going to share my 4 solutions to successfully invest in this real estate market. But first, let's talk about what cash flow is. Cash flow in real estate is when you receive rental income from an investment property. Then after subtracting all the monthly expenses, there is still a profit left over. These expenses include the mortgage, management, insurance, and taxes, as well as also setting money aside for vacancy and repairs. There are 3 big reasons why cash flow is important when investing in real estate. First, it is one of the 4 main ways you actually make a return on your investment. You also make your return in real estate investing from appreciation or the value of the property increasing, tax benefits from using the depreciation write-off, and paying the principal of the loan down with every payment. The second reason cash flow is important is because it can be used as a safety net every month. So if anything happens like a big unexpected expense, you will be able to pay for those big ticket items and not be forced to sell the property. Plus, if you're having trouble finding a tenant in the future, you could lower your rent slightly and still not have to worry about losing money every month. The third reason it's important is because if you eventually build up to having enough properties, over time, you could potentially live off just the cash flow that your real estate investments are generating, never having to spend any of your equity or sell any of your properties. Similar to investing in the stock market and living off just the dividends that are paid to you, never actually needing to sell any stocks. So when buying investment properties, your cash flow should always be based on the amount of money that you had to spend. This is called your cash on cash return. So if you had to spend $40,000 upfront to buy a property and the yearly cash flow was $4,000, your cash on cash return would be 10%. Upfront expenses associated with buying a property would be the down payment, the closing costs, and the rehab amount. So let's say since the market is pretty tough right now, an investor has a minimum goal of a 5% cash on cash return. So if we look at an example, this will explain how much interest rates affect cash on cash return. Let's say a property is listed for $250,000 and it can rent for $1,850 a month, which is fairly standard for where I am around Central Virginia. This example is using a 20% down payment, 15% for repairs and vacancy, then another 10% for property management. So with a 3% interest rate, you can make a cash on cash return of 5% and make $236 a month in cash flow. But if everything stays the same and your interest rate goes up to 8%, you will have a negative cash flow, meaning you have to pay $390 a month just to hold the property. If you wanted to make that same 5% cash on cash return at today's interest rates of 8%, even if rents went up $100 a month, you would still have to offer $80,000 less or $170,000 on a property that's listed for $250,000. The problem is home prices haven't gone down $50,000 to $100,000, and with limited supply, sellers are unlikely to accept these low offers. So here's my list of the top 4 solutions to this problem. Number 4 on my list is to just buy negative cash flowing properties. As I said before, you make money from your investment in 4 ways. So with this strategy, you will be leaning heavily on the other 3. If you have a great income or a large amount of reserves and can afford to put a couple $100s a month into your property, it may be worth it. If your property increases $100,000 in value over the next 5 years, you wouldn't regret putting a couple $1,000s into it each year. Plus, you will always have the option to refinance if rates go down and be able to cash flow at that point. Rents also increase 2 to 4% every year, and your principal and interest payment will be fixed. So eventually, you should be able to make a profit over time, even with the cost of the variable expenses rising as well. Just be sure you are always able to hold the property for the long term, using your income and reserves so you aren't ever forced to sell at a loss. Number 3 on my list is to self-manage the property. Most investors like to hire a property management company and pay them a fee of around 10% of the rent to have them complete the work of marketing the property, dealing with the lease, doing background checks on tenants, responding to repair requests, and much more, which is understandable because this gives more time for the investor to look for their next property. But when good deals are hard to find, you may want to consider giving yourself a competitive advantage when making offers. So if 2 investors have the same goal of a 5% cash on cash return on the same property example that we looked at before with the same expenses, and one is planning on paying a property manager a 10% fee, the most they could offer is $158,000. And if one of the investors is going to self-manage so they don't have to pay anything to a property management company, can offer $185,000 or almost $30,000 more to achieve the same 5% cash-on-cash return. Number 2 on my list is to put more money down. Most lenders require investors to put at least 20% down when buying a property, but there is generally no maximum amount that you can put down. Most investors only put 20% down because it allows them to maximize their leverage. But if no properties are making financial sense at 20% down, then you may want to take a different approach. If you have enough money saved up but are struggling to find cash flow, then try running your numbers at a down payment of 35 to 50%. Your cash-on-cash return will most likely not increase dramatically because the amount of money you're investing is higher, but your monthly cash flow could increase enough to make it a profitable investment. If you look at a property example that's listed for $215,000 and it rents for $1,850 a month with all the expenses the same as they were before, and you put 20% down, you would have a negative cash-on-cash return of 4.6 and have to pay $182 a month just to hold the property. But if you take that same example and now put 50% down, your cash-on-cash return would then be 3% and you would be getting paid $290 a month while holding the property. Now, while you are having to spend more money and use less leverage, you are also lowering your risk because you now have significant cash flow, ensuring you will be able to make the monthly payments and never be forced to sell the property. In my opinion, putting more money down is better than not investing in real estate at all, and also a greater return than investing in other things like the stock market, because the S&P 500 usually returns around 10% a year. If we look at the example of the $215,000 property we just talked about, let's say we put 50% down and had $4,000 in closing costs. The yearly cash flow would give you around a 3% return. If the property appreciated at the normal 3% appreciation rate, that would give you a 5.7% return. Your loan balance would also get paid down in the first year by around $900. That would give you a 0.8% return. And your depreciation tax write-off would be around $8,000. If you were in the 22% tax bracket, that would give you a savings of around $1,700. And that would add 1.5% to your total return of 11.23%. You may be thinking that real estate investing is a lot more work just to get a 1% better rate of return than the stock market does. But remember, this is just year one. The amortization schedule of your loan will become more and more principal heavy with each year. Also, make sure to run these numbers conservatively when you're about to make an offer on a property. If your conservative projected return is around 11%, in reality, it could be closer to 13 or 14%. With the stock market, 7 or 8% would be more conservative for the S&P 500. Also, just like with the negative cash flow method, hopefully you'll be able to do a cash out refinance if rates go down. At that point, your lender will be able to lend you 75% of the home's value, taking you back to the standard 25% equity position. Once this happens, you'll be maximizing your leverage. Just the 3% appreciation rate alone would be making you a 12% return on your money, because you would only have 25% of the property's value still invested in the deal. Unlike before, when you were making around a 6% return from the appreciation while having 50% of the property's value invested. So the number one way to invest with high interest rates is to offer seller financing. Seller financing is when the seller also acts as the lender in the transaction. In this case, you are able to negotiate everything you wouldn't normally be able to with a regular lender, like the down payment, interest rates, and the length of the loan term. If you and the seller can come to an agreement, you can have any combination of these terms that you want. If the seller needs a big down payment of 50%, you could agree, but request a 1% interest rate. Or you could ask for a 45-year loan term in exchange for the large down payment. With seller financing, you can be as creative as you need to be in order to make the numbers work. But the seller will have to have the property paid off with no mortgage of their own to offer this, unless your down payment is big enough for them to pay off their existing mortgage. So let's look at an example again. Let's say the property is listed for $215,000. It rents for $1,850. The expenses are the same as before, 15% for repairs and vacancy, 10% for management. If you have a minimum goal of a 5% cash-on-cash return and you wanted to make a normal offer with a traditional lender, you would have to offer $158,000, which is $57,000 less than list price, which is not likely to be accepted. But let's say the property has no mortgage and has been listed on the market for 60 days. Since the property's been sitting a while, the seller's probably been getting offers similar to $158,000 from other investors trying to get the same deal you are. But if you brought up seller financing to them, you could offer them the full list price of $215,000. But for the seller to get this top dollar price, you would need them to finance it to you directly. You would need them to give you a 4.4% interest rate for a loan term of 35 years. This will give you a 7% cash on cash return and $275 a month in cash flow. The higher return and more cash flow will be necessary on your end because you are paying market value for the property, maybe even a little higher than market value. So you should require a bigger safety net of cash flow. Many people think seller financing can only be done directly to the seller with no agents involved. My local MLS actually provides us with seller financing addendums that we use when submitting these types of offers. The big question is, why would a seller accept something like this? There are a couple reasons why people accept seller financing offers. The main one is if their property has been sitting on the market for a while, that means they are not getting the price they want. You can come and simply say you will pay them the price they want as long as they can provide you the financing terms that you want. Another reason someone could be interested in seller financing is because they will be receiving consistent income from you paying the loan every month. This has some tax advantages as well because they are receiving the interest payments spread out over time, not the entire lump sum. Also, if you default on the mortgage payment, they will take the house back, keeping all the money you have already gave them, as well as having the option to sell it again. Keep in mind, the seller doesn't have to wait the full 30 to 40 years to get all their money. The buyer and seller will most likely negotiate a balloon payment. A balloon payment is when the full balance of the loan is due. For example, if the balloon payment is in 7 years, but the loan term is 35 years, then your mortgage payments are based on a 35-year schedule, but in year 7, the remaining loan balance will be paid to the seller. This will give the buyer 3 options. They can refinance the loan to a traditional lender before 7 years, they can pay off the loan in cash in year 7, or sell the property before 7 years and use the proceeds to pay off the seller financing loan. With that being the case, if seller financing is not something you are comfortable doing, you can watch my video here on how to use traditional loans for real estate investing. Feel free to comment any questions you have, and if you need help buying, selling, or investing in real estate, my information will be in the description.